I'm Winston Ibrahim. It's my pleasure to be able to moderate this panel. And we have an incredible group of speakers today. So without much ado, I'll pass the mic to each of them in turn. And please give a brief, 2-minute introduction of yourselves and, what your background is. And we'll start the event from there.
Hi, I'm Sean Rosenmoss. I work for the San Francisco Department of the Environment. I'm sort of a special ops person. My title is Manager of Development, Community Partnerships, and the San Francisco Carbon Fund. And I do a lot of work on resiliency planning and adaptation planning in the city.
Good afternoon. My name is Yana Aranda, and I am the president of an organization called Engineering for Change, which was founded and incubated by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. E4C is a knowledge organization with an online platform reaching a community of over 1.1 million people worldwide who are working or interested in the intersection of technology and global development. We offer a media platform reporting on news, including issues related to climate change and technology, as well as an online academy delivering professional development for our entire community. And last but not least, an innovation lab where we experiment and develop new knowledge products to really raise the innovation quotient in the technology for good space.
Hi. The lights are so bright here. As far as we're concerned, this room is packed full. We can't see anything, so thank you all for being here, all of you. My name is Alicia Steyr. I'm delighted to be here. I'm the Deputy Director of the Stanford Steyr Taylor Center for Energy Policy and Finance. It's a joint initiative of the Business School and the Law School. And for those of you not familiar with centers at universities, I think of us in our best instance as a bridge between academics and markets. So the mission of the center is to develop innovative policies and financial mechanisms to scale up financing for deep decarbonization globally. And we think about our work in terms of innovate, teach, connect. So we develop and explore new mechanisms. We teach to the current crop of students as well as to practitioners. And we connect students and practitioners and thought leaders with each other and ideas with folks who can make them happen. Looking forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pari Kasotia. I'm the Deputy Director at the Solar Foundation. We're a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. We are the one who produce the National Solar Jobs Census Report each year. We look at the job and the economic impact of the solar industry in the U.S. In addition to that, we also work with local communities to help them reduce their market barriers or soft cost of solar PV so that they're more prepared to increase the penetration of solar energy. In addition to that, we also work on workforce development programs, making sure that the workforce is ready to take on the new jobs that are coming out of the clean energy sector. Prior to my current role, I led the Iowa Energy Office, where I managed and led 200 plus projects on energy efficiency, clean energy, and biofuels.
Thank you so much, panelists. So for our first topic of discussion, I think there's a lot of skepticism and a lot of confusion about exactly how severe the implications of climate change are. And I would love to get the thoughts of this panel on, what are the security implications? What are some of these scenarios that we could potentially see facing us in the next quarter century, both in this country and abroad? And there's this kind of creeping sense of, insulation in various parts of the country that this is not an issue that impacts us at all. And I think that, whether or not that's true is A, open for a lot of debate, and then B, in a globalized world, one part of the world getting dramatically affected is by default going to affect everything else. So can we walk through some of our thoughts and sort of the implications of this?
Well, I think it's going to be severe and major impacts, and we can watch it unfold right in front of us, right? Obviously with Harvey and Irma, when you're talking about the state of Florida with millions of people without electricity, and they're going to be without electricity for several weeks, that's a huge impact. when you're looking at, and that's just here, you know, we're not dealing with the levels of poverty that, say, parts of drought-stricken Africa are dealing with. You know, when you're looking at a population with no access to mass transit and all of their cars are flooded, and so even when the flooding goes down, they don't have a working automobile to get to work. This was a huge issue in Louisiana last summer with all the flooding. This was a huge issue after Katrina. So there's a lot of cascading effects that we need to start talking about. And I'm fortunately, I represent the city in a group called the C40. One of their subgroups is the Risk Assessment Network, and that's one of the things that they're looking at is all the cascading effects of just one incident, a horrible hurricane with massive flooding. There's going to be a lot of cascades to that.
So from our perspective, I completely agree, first and foremost, that the inevitable is already happening, and there's no denying that climate change is upon us, and globally we need to really tackle the issues. So from the Engineering for Change perspective, what we do is engage with communities globally around what technology-based solutions are available to us to address some of these resiliency issues and what already exists and what can be built to really help communities overcome, especially communities at the base of the socioeconomic pyramid, which we are concerned with. So a good example of this is when the earthquake had happened in Haiti. Much of the infrastructure, the bulk of the infrastructure was destroyed during the earthquake. Interestingly, traditional buildings called gingerbread houses, which were made out of wood, many of them stayed because the construction was actually earthquake resistant. So it is examples like that, technology examples like that, that we are trying to track and highlight to inspire our community of technologists, scientists, engineers to think differently about what needs to happen and how they can innovate on these designs. In Haiti, for example, a largely deforested nation, building from wood is no longer necessarily an option. But the actual construction style, the means and methods by which that particular building was made, those are still valuable blueprints for the next generation of infrastructure development. So this is the kind of thing that we're trying to arrive at and recognize as helping us to move past how we've already thought about engineering solutions to the next new and necessary technique.
Sure. So I'll answer the question from the perspective of our work at Stanford, which is looking at how to prepare markets and asset owners for the transitions, the risks and opportunities that climate presents. So a couple of things I like to do in response to that question are just sort of frame some facts, both from the science and the impacts and the risks. So on the science side, just to level set a little bit, and I'm not going to walk through a lecture on climate change, but a couple of data points that I find helpful that you can track. The 10 hottest years on record have all happened in the last 10 years. 2016 shattered the record set by 2015, which shattered the record set by 2014. So you're seeing the rapid increase in heat and overall global temperatures. You're seeing the effects, as we've seen now with Irma and Harvey, of the intensity of extreme weather events in terms of rainfall, storm surge, wind speeds. Looking at it in terms of the impacts that weather and climate can have on markets. So in the 35 years prior to 1990, the number of weather events resulting in billion-dollar losses, economic losses, was about on average 5 per year. In 2016, there were 15 weather and climate-related disasters with losses exceeding $1 billion in the U.S. alone. Now, part of that is regions are getting wealthier, so the economic losses are getting greater. And in areas where there are fewer, where the economic losses are actually decreasing, the lost lives are increasing. So there's also sort of a disparity and north-south disparity in terms of the impacts, whether they're economic or physical. Another data point I like to put out to help level set is in terms of the value at risk when we're talking about climate change. Again, this is from the markets and sort of perspective. There are $143 trillion of assets under management worldwide, to be sort of the whole pie. If you look at the value at risk from a 6-degree warming scenario, so business as usual, which let's hope we're not heading there, that puts $43 trillion of present value at risk. So roughly a third of total investable assets are at risk if in a business as usual scenario. So the economic impacts of climate unmitigated are profound. To put that into context, the subprime mortgage crisis wiped out about $19 trillion of U.S. household wealth. So much greater scale than the subprime mortgage crisis and more pervasive. And the risks that we're talking about take two primary forms. One is that are categorized as transitional risks. So what are the risks to businesses and investors as technologies and regulations transition from high carbon, low resiliency to low carbon, high resiliency? And then a suite of physical risks as you think about extreme weather events, categorized as acute weather events versus chronic weather events, where you're talking about heat indexes greater than workers can healthily be outside working, and along those types of lines. So, last thing I'll say in terms of putting some data on into response to your question, Winston, is a dollar invested in disaster preparedness saves between $4 and $15 in recovery. So as we're thinking about how to rebuild in places like Florida and Houston, it's really critical that we start with an eye towards resilience in terms of how we're putting money back into systems that are designed not to withstand the changes that we know are happening in our climate.
So definitely agree with all the data points that Alicia mentioned. I think it sheds important light on what are the risks of climate change. One thing that we also should keep in mind is when scientists talk about 100-year events, what we are seeing now is more frequency and more severability of those events. And what that does is it places a huge amounts of stress on our emergency response systems. So that's one of the threats that our country faces as we get more of these events. Our ability to react quickly and effectively is being threatened. So that's one of the immediate threats that I see. Specifically, we are also seeing threats to our food systems. In 2013, there were droughts in the Midwest, and the Mississippi River, for example, had dried out. And so you couldn't move these barges along the waterways because there wasn't any water. Our food system is so dependent on our transportation, so when you have climate change-related events, it not only impacts food or other economies, but it impacts the whole country because of our highly dependent and interrelated systems. We're also seeing threats to our health systems. Infectious diseases that we know as diseases of the developing countries or tropical countries are becoming more prominent in the US. And so how do we address those increasing challenges of our healthcare, not only the system, but also the cost that comes with it? In terms of the national security, climate change has a different level of impact for other countries. Countries that already have weak governments will start seeing weaker governments, potential for more ethnic conflicts, fight for resources in a resource-constrained world. And all of that has an implication for the US, especially where US has significant military bases in other countries. So the impact of what's happening outside the US will be felt very strongly by what we have within our country and how it will impact the individuals and the citizens here. So, at the bottom of it all, we will see a change in our quality of life as we know it. We'll have to come up with systems that can adapt quickly, but are also efficient in terms of resources and cost.
Thank you, panelists. So, unfortunately, this is, kind of a very hot topic politically, and, obviously we want to, prevent ourselves from straying into politics here. But it strikes me that, there's a lot of things that our government is not necessarily doing for one reason or the other that is on, the kind of bad side of the climate change equation. And I'm just curious, are there thoughts that you guys have based on your experience of some, policies or regulatory initiatives that, aren't sort of helpful or deleterious to this, problem, and any, kind of suggestions you would have for changing those?
I'll jump in. I'll slam the buzzer on that one. Yes. Where to begin? I mean, I think one particularly poignant moment in tracking policy and climate and its implications is in the week before Hurricane Harvey hit, Trump rolled back an Obama order mandating that federal buildings take into account future sea level rise in their infrastructure planning. So now, when you go to rebuild in Houston, you don't need to worry about what future flooding plans look like if you're investing taxpayer dollars in federal infrastructure. That is unhelpful. There's another data point that I find that really hammers home the role of policy in climate. And I will say, and I'm an optimist, and you have to be to work in this field, that when it comes to the electric power sector, the markets are with us, and the train has left the station, and you're going to see a rapid transformation to clean energy in the electric power sector. You're starting to see some really exciting announcements in the transportation sector with the transition to EVs, but there is a lot of work to be done to hit a 2-degree scenario in other sectors of the environment where policy is absolutely critical. The flip side of that, or another way of looking at it, is what's the cost to the economy if there isn't leadership on the policy side. And there's a great researcher at Stanford named Marshall Burke who actually took the time after Trump announced the withdrawal from Paris to calculate the economic impact of the Paris withdrawal on the U.S. economy. And he looked at the very simple but robust analysis that just said, okay, if the U.S. reneges on its pledges, what's the climate impact of that, which kicked us up 0.3 degrees Celsius on the global climate measure, which went from 3.3 to 3.6 without the U.S. If you add up all the Paris climate commitments, by the way, it doesn't get us to 2 degrees. But if you take U.S. out, you go from 3.3 to 3.6. 0.3 degrees Celsius doesn't sound like a lot, but when you turn the temperature up by 0.3 degrees and hit play on the U.S. economy, the present value economic losses of that temperature increase, again, from these physical risks and transitional risks, cost the U.S. economy $3 trillion. So the lack of policy leadership is creating present-day economic losses for the U.S. economy in terms of livelihoods, job creation, public health, and the cost, repeated taxpayer losses in propping up infrastructure that we know is not resilient is really expensive and unhelpful from a climate perspective.
So I agree, we do need strong policies at the federal level, especially setting the goals and the direction for the country and also providing financial resources. All of that comes from the federal level. But at the same time, I also want to emphasize the strong role state governments and local governments have to play. If you look at the US clean energy markets, for example, the most of the growth and most of the development has come from the state leadership. Policies such as the renewable portfolio standards, your carbon markets that we have in California, as well as the East Coast, your net metering policies, your property tax exemptions, all of these policies that have truly moved the clean energy market and the energy efficiency markets have emerged at the state government levels. So I think policies that are closer to the implementation level is highly crucial to get us to where we want to go.
I can give it another lens from the global development side of the equation. I can't necessarily speak as strongly to the policy as my panelists can, but what we see is a tremendous investment in entrepreneurship and innovation in regions which are getting most hit, who are the canaries in the coal mine relative to climate change, and those are mostly small island nations, a lot of them developing countries. The World Bank has been investing tremendously in climate innovation centers, which are centers in regions like Morocco, Vietnam, Ethiopia, Ghana, and the Caribbean being very pertinent right now, who are really incubating new solutions, new technology-based solutions to battle climate change, and they're providing them with capacity building, investing in their technical understanding of what already exists and helping them train to develop solutions more rapidly and scale them up to enter the market and really be able to be prepared. So to me, that serves as a good example demonstrating where even if, kind of complementary to what you're saying, even where policy is still kind of getting up to where it needs to be, there is already that momentum and that investment in business solutions, especially in startups, to try to address this issue and tackle the problem from many sides.
And just finally on policy, I don't know if you were reading about some of the plant explosions in Houston after Harvey, and many of the first responders were harmed in that. And as the EPA rolls back their regulatory laws around emissions and how chemical facilities operate, that's going to be a huge impact. I mean, climate is a threat multiplier. And so when you roll back these regulations just for how a plant operates in a regular day, and they've got poor regulations, and now you throw climate change, you throw flooding or heat episodes on top of that, it makes that lack of regulation even more dangerous, particularly for human health.
Thank you, panelists. So I think we've sufficiently impressed on our audience just, how potentially bad, these scenarios can be for, everybody in the U.S. and everybody around the world. What do we think, some of the positive, possibilities of addressing this correctly could be? Because it strikes me that as bad as these worst case scenarios are, there's a real opportunity here if the correct leadership is shown for beneficial outcomes to happen on the economic side, on the political side, on a potentially global level.
Well, I'm just going to give one example. So jobs. This is, I love Al Gore. This is a crisis and an opportunity. Full disclosure, I am from Southeast Texas and South Louisiana. I grew up going back and forth. I have a lot of family in that area. We still don't know what happened to our house on the Gulf Coast of Texas, just south of Beaumont, because we can't get there. So I happen to know that on the coast of Louisiana, they're using the BP oil spill money to go in and build up the coastline. About one football field worth of coastline dissolves on the coast of Louisiana. And they have created 30,000 jobs, just moving jobs from the fossil fuel petroleum industry. Same kind of jobs are needed to go in and deal with replenishing the coastline and replenishing the wetlands. So 30,000 jobs, and they're good jobs. They pay about $60,000 to $70,000 a year. So that's what we can get. And that's just one example. That's just one example, one state. And you were going to talk about renewable energy and microgrids and that type of thing. Jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. I can complement that again from the international point of view. There is really, especially with off-grid energy and renewables, a really important and huge growing opportunity. So as a concrete example with some numbers behind it, there is a startup called Angaza, which developed technology that actually creates a pay-as-you-go platform, or enables a pay-as-you-go platform to be adapted to any kind of microgrid solution. So in regions like Kenya or Tanzania, where solar is taking off rapidly, but the payment for solar is very much unapproachable. It's far too expensive to buy a solar panel combined with all the other accoutrements, the lights and so forth, for a family that's living on an income of less than $4 a day. So how do you overcome that economic barrier? Well, you have to create opportunities for them to be able to pay in small amounts using mobile payments, doing it the same way that you top up minutes on your feature phone, which is most of the types of phones that are prevalent in those regions. So Angaza created a technology solution that's flexible, can be adapted to a variety of providers in order to be able for users to be able to top up their minutes on their not minutes, but their hours on their solar system. And that solution has now garnered them $6.9 million in investment recently. So real opportunity, dollars behind it, and as well as a tremendous impact on climate change issues.
Sure. The good news is I have a lot of different things to say, and I don't know how much time we want to take here, but I'll give some discrete examples. But the short answer is there's a lot, and there's a tremendous amount. In fact, I would encourage anyone who hasn't to read a book called Resource Revolution, which articulates this transformation as the greatest business opportunity in the 21st century. But to break that down a little bit, to take it from the electric power sector perspective, one of the yardsticks I like to look at is a measure that's referred to as the clean trillion, which puts a mark in the road about how much investment we need globally to meet a 2-degree target in the electric power sector, and actually doesn't include energy efficiency or low carbon fuels. Then you get to 2 trillion. But whatever the number is, and these numbers are so big, it's sort of hard to wrap your mind around. The helpful metric is to know where we are now, and in the $1 trillion mark, we're about a third of the way there. So we need 3 times more investment in these technologies. And what you're seeing that's really exciting is the cost of these technologies have dropped dramatically. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we keep hovering around this $300 billion, is because it keeps getting cheaper to deploy this stuff. So we need to deploy even more to make that number go up. But you think about the investment opportunity that exists there, and the jobs that will be created, and the companies that will grow as a result of that scaling up of investment just in the electric power sector. I don't want to steal any thunder of the job statistics, so I'm going to leave those notes aside. The other thing I'll say, and I don't know if we're going to get to this in one final wrap-up, so I want to just say it now. People think about climate, and often, and I came to it this way, I think a lot of people do, as an environmental issue, and sort of think about the resources that may be involved, or the fields that sort of get you in from the environmental door. And one thing I really want to impress upon on this vast audience is that it's a macroeconomic issue. It's a productivity issue. It affects every sector of the economy. It affects every country in the world. And so you don't need to be an environmentalist. You don't need to be an energy expert. You don't need to be a city planner. You don't need to be STEM helps. But actually, there's a great new book that's come out. Paul Hawken put together a vast project looking at all the different solutions to climate on a cost basis to figure out what would be the biggest bang for our buck. And if you add them together, the biggest contribution to climate mitigation on the most cost-effective basis is educating girls and family planning. So this isn't, again, not an environmental issue. It is in many ways a women's issue, and so thinking about the opportunity set as a much broader, in a much broader lens than just start a solar company, although that's good too.
Yeah, so we cannot emphasize enough the value of job creation in the clean energy sector. Currently, right now, there are about 260,000 solar jobs in the U.S. That's greater than oil and gas mining sector. But so these jobs, they pay well, they have really good starting wages, and they're also clean. So it's a win-win for individuals, for companies, and for the environment. The economic development impact of clean energy, for example, solar, if my data is correct, for every $1 invested in solar, it generates about $3 in economic activity. So the multiplier effect of the clean energy sector is immense. We also see benefits in the property tax increases for cities. So cities and communities have a lot to benefit from clean energy investments. But I think for me personally, the issue of environmental equity that generates from clean energy is immense. As we know, most of the fossil fuel power plants are located near or at communities that are predominantly people of color. Solar and wind and energy efficiency and storage jobs give us an opportunity to change how we produce and consume energy, but at the same time positively impacting the communities that are pretty much within near distance of fossil fuel power plants. So from addressing environmental justice challenges, making sure there are equitable opportunities for all individuals is immense. In fact, we just released look at the diversity in the solar industry, and all solar proponents and wind proponents call for increased access for these technologies to all groups of people, regardless of income, class, all the other factors that go with it.
So to close everything out, what is one practical solution that anybody here can, deploy in their life that can make a difference in this problem? What's one thing that anybody could really do, bearing in mind that we have 3 minutes left?
I'll be quick. I think, my recommendation for everyone is climate change is a topic to be talked about by everyone. We shouldn't leave it to our local governments or our academia or our scientists, but it's everyone. All citizens are impacted by climate change. So everyone should give a voice to it, and especially businesses, not just your tech giants like Google and Microsoft, but small to medium-sized businesses who consume energy and oftentimes have very inefficient systems. They have to talk about climate change and its impact as well.
That's a hard one to give one. Can I do two? There's more risk and opportunity in your investment portfolio than are dreamt of in your philosophy. So to the extent you have assets to manage or under management, be asking those tough questions, be moving the markets in the right direction. The other thing I would say is it's time to give the Republicans some cover to come forward on climate. I mean, there's just no reason for this to be a bipartisan issue, and to whatever extent, I have contributed to a polarization or partisanship of climate. I ask your forgiveness, but really, like this, reach out to conservative friends and to people across the aisle and to representatives of all stripes, and let this be a bipartisan issue.
This is actually a lot tougher than I expected. I would have to say that from the perspective where I'm at, learn what is out there and what is working already, and about the communities that are dealing with this in a very real way every day, not just the Harveys or the Irmas or the other climate events that have hit the United States, but what happened in Nepal, what happened in other communities, and how they've responded, and what's worked and what has not worked, especially if you're in a position to be able to influence policy or influence how technologies are developed in order to meet this new reality and the new normal.
One action. Yes, know that this is happening, talk about it, and give people kudos who are actually doing something about it, because I absolutely contribute to that bipolar, whatever, bipartisan snarkiness. But we do need to recognize the leaders who are stepping up and doing something, particularly Republicans. I'm sorry, and ask them to go further with what they're doing.
Well, thank you so much, panel. Thank you so much, audience. Unfortunately, we are at our terminal limit, so we have to end everything. But we'll be hanging out for questions for a little bit. So thanks so much.